All right, well, we have a double milestone this week. One part in the upward direction, and the other part not so much. The U.S. has, as expected, now hit 12 million barrels per day of crude oil production. Again, as has been the case for nearly the last year or so, nearly all of that continuing additional production is additional shale output coming from the Permian Basin in West Texas and eastern New Mexico, as oil output from the other shale formations is either relatively flat in some cases or repeatedly undulating in others and not really significantly gaining. The U.S.'s previous peak, its first peak, was right around 10 million barrels per day back in 1970, and by around the mid-2000s, it had gone down to between 5 and 6 million barrels per day. But with the onset of the first global oil production peak and the skyrocketing of oil prices, even though the shale reserves had been known about for a while and the fracking and horizontal drilling technologies that were used to develop them had actually been developed earlier, the shale formations in the U.S. only began to be rapidly developed during that time period and up until now because the skyrocketing of oil prices made them suddenly become profitable. And on the negative side of million barrel marks, Venezuela, as expected, has now passed under 1 million barrels per day as its oil output continues to decrease, and has now slipped down to, as of the recording of this video, around 950,000 barrels per day. A significant fall from its previous production plateau that it had been holding up until a couple years ago of about 3 million barrels per day. And Venezuela, up until the end of this month, is expected to continue slipping down to at least 800,000 barrels per day, and unfortunately also has the potential to fall down maybe even to 750 or 700,000 barrels per day. So, although I hope things turn around for Venezuela sometime in the future, in the near and immediate future, that most likely isn't going to be the case. Now, welcome back around, everybody, for another weekly energy and resource update video, going over update information on from oil and gas and energy topics through mining, minerals, metals, all of the more fundamental, foundational things that really underpin our civilization, and with rare exceptions are mostly ignored, especially by media nowadays, in favor of jumping down the rabbit hole of political drama. So if you like hearing about energy and resources and things of the sort, or you're just sick and tired of hearing about the usual political drama nonsense and would rather listen to anything else, then this is one of the places for you, so please subscribe and stick around. We put out at least one video every week, other videos occasionally. Comments are welcome, you are welcome, and we will get started down our usual list of data, starting with the weekly U.S. oil and gas data releases. As we opened up with, U.S. oil production has now reached 12 million barrels per day. Again, as I've said before, expecting it to get up to 12.8 million barrels per day by the end of this year. And I expect its second production peak and final production peak most likely to occur between 13.4 and 13.7 million barrels per day in the next couple years, maybe up to 13.8. U.S. oil consumption jumped up from last time, up to just over 20.7 million barrels per day. Individual product numbers within that being U.S. gasoline consumption, bumping up a little bit, up to 8.8 million barrels per day. U.S. diesel fuel consumption jumping up to 4.22 million barrels per day. U.S. jet fuel consumption taking a drop down to 1.41 million barrels per day. And propane consumption shooting up to 2.05 million barrels per day equivalent. Now, propane consumption works a little bit more oddly. A lot of the gas propane is produced from petroleum refining, and it is used as a home or building heating fuel. However, unlike natural gas, which is supplied via pipeline to the furnaces of buildings that it's used to heat, propane isn't supplied via pipeline. Propane is almost always contained in a tank, so its demand level isn't exactly direct in response to increases in heating usage, as obviously more isn't just instantly coming in via a pipeline as more is used. You have to actually refill your propane tank, or place an order for the propane truck to come in and have the propane truck worker refill your propane tank for you. So back during the polar vortex event, propane demand spiked up for that week, as most likely I would expect a lot of smart people probably called ahead, and even if their propane tanks were nowhere near empty, they probably got in more propane and made sure their tanks were refilled up to the top before the extreme cold came blasting in. And now several weeks afterwards, a lot of propane tanks were probably bottoming out. So a lot of people and a lot of businesses were probably placing their refill orders over the course of this past week. In terms of price, oil has begun to continue inching upward a little bit more. Oil started the week around $55 per barrel, almost hit $58 a barrel during the week, and then fell back down a little bit, and as of this recording, it was around $57. Over on the natural gas side of things, U.S. natural gas production bumped up a little bit, up to 99.3 billion cubic feet per day. U.S. natural gas consumption came in at 109 flat. Individual numbers within that came in at heating demand, 44 billion cubic feet per day. Consumption by natural gas-fired power plants came in at 25.2 billion cubic feet per day. And consumption of natural gas for fuel for the natural gas pipeline's pumping system came in the same as last week at 6.9 billion cubic feet per day. U.S. natural gas storage inventories took a bigger drop than previously, now dropping down to 1.7 trillion cubic feet in storage. In comparison to usually, on average around this time, we would still have 2.07 trillion cubic feet. And last year in particular, which was a very high demand winter as well, we still had 1.78. Now, I'd been suspecting that this winter the U.S. would draw below the 1 trillion cubic foot mark. I still think there is a fair chance of that, although there were several sudden warm spells throughout the winter as well that were unexpected. So that did slow it down a bit at times. And so now it does look like there also may be a chance that it won't actually, and may more so just get right down to it. However, I do think the chance is still fairly there for us to actually go below the 1 trillion cubic foot mark. Price-wise, natural gas remained above $2.50 per thousand cubic feet and climbed up over the course of the week, up over $2.70 towards $2.75, but at the end began climbing back down again. Now the monthly U.S. shale data was released. So starting with the biggest player, obviously, the Permian Shale. Growth from the Permian Shale had been beginning to slow down. However, over this past month, it took a sudden jump up again, as a lot of new wells being drilled in Texas were completed. Over the last several weeks, the number of actively drilling rigs in Texas has dropped rather quickly, from around 550 to a little over 500 or so. Oil production from the Permian specifically over this past month jumped up from 3.83 million barrels per day up to 3.98. Expectations have been around for the Permian Shale to peak anywhere between 4.5 to 7 million barrels per day. My personal leaning has been and remains between 5.8 and 6.2, with more likelihood of 6.1. The other major shale contributor in terms of natural gas this time is the Appalachia Shale. The Appalachia Shale actually remained relatively flat over the past month. It lost a little bit of production, but in terms of rounding, it remained at 31.3 billion cubic feet per day, dropping specifically from 31.33 down to 31.29. And I've been expecting the Appalachia Shale to end up peaking anywhere between 36 and 42, with more of a leaning likelihood towards 37 or 38. The Bakken and Eagle Ford shales continue desperately gasping, desperately clinging to life, or clinging to their second peaks in production, rather, before actually dropping down into their terminal decline phases. Bakken, in particular, over the past several months, has jumped up and down within the same range, bumping up from below 1.4 up to 1.45 million barrels per day, then last month down to 1.41 million barrels per day, and now this month back up to 1.44 million barrels per day. Eagle Ford held flat rounding-wise at 1.43 million barrels per day. On the fine numbers, it increased a tiny margin from 1.427 up to 1.429. However, its natural gas output has begun to decrease, dropping from 7.05 down to 6.89 billion cubic feet per day. The Haynesville natural gas shale, which is centered around the Triple Corner area where Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas meet, increased, bumping up from 9.92 up to 10.11 billion cubic feet per day. I'm expecting the Haynesville's second and final peak in production to onset between 12 and 13 billion cubic feet per day. The Anadarko Shale in Oklahoma increased its oil output by a little bit, up from 582 to 587,000 barrels per day, while its natural gas output remained relatively flat at 7.67 billion cubic feet per day, the same it was last month. The Niobrara Shale, out at the foot of the Rockies, took a sudden jump back upwards, jumping up from 669 up to 697,000 barrels per day, and its natural gas output continuing to gradually rise as it has been, up from 5.18 to 5.26 billion cubic feet per day. And data from almost the end of the year of 2018 has come in for the Barnett Shale in Texas, which peaked in 2012 at 5.74, and by the end of 2017 had fallen down to 3.43 billion cubic feet per day. And now, as 2018 has ended, it has declined to 3.17. Now, outwards to some other developments in the rest of the world. There was a oil and gas discovery in Indonesia, on the island of Sumatra. A extension or offshoot of a already producing field was discovered. Mostly natural gas in the discovery, with the estimate being about 1.4 trillion cubic feet, alongside 25 million barrels of condensate. Now globally in total, this brings oil discoveries this year, at least those that have been publicized and that I'm aware of, up to a total of 1.45 billion barrels. For reference, the world is now consuming about 36 billion barrels each year, and since huge parts of the world have been largely explored for the most part, oil discoveries have been on the decline for a long time. 2017, if I remember, came in at 4 billion barrels discovered. Last year, however, 2018, was the first year in a long time that we actually had a reversal of the trend, whereas 2017, it was something like 4 billion barrels. 2018, it was over 7 billion barrels. This year, we may actually continue the trend reversal. We may discover more than last year, as even if we held this exact rate of discovering about 1.5 billion barrels every 2 months, 12 months divided by 2 is 6 times 1.5. That gives you 9 billion barrels total. So it's still far short of replacing the amount we'd consume, but it would be a continuation of trend reversal, going from 4 up to 7 up to 9. And this also brings total natural gas discoveries this year, again, that have been publicized and that I'm aware of, up to 8.8 trillion cubic feet. Now, in a similar situation to oil, that is far, far short of what the world consumes each year. At present, the world in total consumes between 100 and 120 trillion cubic feet each year. So I'll continue to keep track of the total that I'm able to find as the year goes on. Now, a few other developments going over into mining and metals. The platinum group metals have been continuing to shoot up in price. Platinum has gone back above $800 per ounce. Palladium continued shooting upwards, heading up towards $1,500 an ounce, but turning away from it at the last minute and heading back downwards. And rhodium, the rarest of them all, jumped up over $2,700 per ounce. Now, that's not a record for it. That's by no means the highest it's ever been. Rhodium, in fact, back during the financial crisis, almost hit $10,000 an ounce. But although this isn't the highest it's ever been, it was a nearly $200 per ounce price jump over the course of just a little over a week. And this is coming about as a result of an announcement in South Africa, where a huge portion of each of these metals is mined. And an announcement came out of South Africa that South Africa's primary union for construction workers and mine workers has been announcing that they're going to call for a strike, but they're calling on all the miners to go on strike. So fears in the market of a sudden supply cutoff are shooting through the roof, with the potential for South Africa's mines to abruptly shut down. And on a last bit before we close out, cobalt, a critical metal in batteries. Cobalt prices have almost dropped back down to $30,000 per ton. This comes after around this time a year ago, them being over $90,000 per ton, as tensions in the Congo, the world's primary supplier of cobalt, were extremely high due to, at the time, large levels of civil unrest, disputes and conflicts with local groups in the region of the nation where most of the cobalt mines are, and the army having to deal with a sudden militant insurgency also in the region of the nation where all the cobalt mines are. But thankfully for the Congolese people, things have since calmed down. Now basically the status and situation in Congo acts essentially as the primary dictator of cobalt prices, aside obviously from increasing global demand, especially nowadays, because between 2/3 and 3/4 of all the world's new cobalt supply is mined from the Congo, that being because roughly 2/3 of all the remaining known unmined cobalt deposits are also in the Congo. Now there are several places elsewhere in the world, one actually being up here in Alaska, where there are suspected to be a fair number of cobalt deposits, and especially as time rolls on in the near future, a lot of those are likely to be looked into as cobalt demand continues climbing. Alright, well that's it for this week. Thank you everybody for sticking around and listening. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like on it. You can also check out my other channel if you like aviation and travel. If you want to support me and my subsistence directly, links to my PayPal, Patreon, and even photography merch shop are down below in the description. I will see everybody around next time, and I pray all goes well for all of you.